Please leave. She doesn't want you here." For a moment, I didn't understand who was speaking. I turned, expecting a stranger. It was my son. The music faded. Laughter dissolved into an uncomfortable hush. Forks froze above plates. 200 guests stood suspended in silence, as if the air itself had been pulled away. That was the instant I learned something cruel and permanent. Some words never soften with time. They don't fade. They don't forgive. They simply stay. My name is Victoria. I am 57 years old, and at that age, I already felt older than my years. Grief, responsibility, and sacrifice have a way of aging you faster than calendars ever could. This is the story of how a wedding didn't just fracture a family. It forced me to finally see what I had been refusing to accept. That day had been beautiful, almost painfully so. The ranch garden glowed beneath soft lantern light. White roses climbed wooden arches. The air smelled of cut grass, warm food, and expensive perfume. Months of planning had led to this night. I had embroidered the table linens myself, stitch by stitch, during nights when sleep wouldn't come. Not because anyone asked me to, because that's what mothers do. We give quietly and hope it matters. I wore a royal blue dress that once belonged to my mother. She wore it to my wedding, long before life hardened me. I pinned my hair into a neat bun, lifted my shoulders, and reminded myself to look proud, calm, dignified. I was the groom's mother. Ethan was marrying Olivia. She had entered his life 2 years earlier and somehow rearranged everything without ever raising her voice. She was polished, controlled, always pleasant. She smiled politely but never first. When I entered the reception hall, I felt her notice me before I saw her. She leaned toward Ethan and whispered something. I watched his posture change. His jaw tightened. He walked toward me, stopping just close enough that no one else could hear. "Mom," he said quietly, "Olivia thinks your dress is distracting." The word landed hard. Distracting. I felt the sting rise in my chest, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "It's all right, sweetheart. I brought another dress. I can change." He looked past me, then at Olivia, then back at me. "No," he said. His voice sharpened. "It's better if you just go home." For a moment, I truly thought I'd misheard him. "She's nervous," he continued. "Your presence makes her uncomfortable. She feels judged." I looked around us. Guests were laughing. Glasses clinked. No one noticed that something sacred was breaking 10 feet from the head table. "I organized this wedding," I whispered. "I paid for half of it. I'm your mother. And that doesn't give you the right to ruin my wife's day," he snapped. The room went silent. Then he said it, clearly, loudly, in front of everyone. "Get out, Mom. She doesn't want you here." I had raised him to be kind. I didn't recognize his voice. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I nodded, picked up my purse, and turned toward the exit. My legs felt wooden as I walked away. No one stopped me. No one followed. I drove back to the ranch alone, the keys hanging from my neck feeling heavier than they ever had before. I thought that night was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong, because the phone call I received the next morning would cost me far more than my pride. After being thrown out of my son's wedding, sleep never came. The ranch was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every thought louder. Even the floorboards seemed to hold their breath. I sat on the edge of my bed as dawn crept closer, still wearing the memory of that blue dress, replaying his words again and again. "Get out, Mom." At sunrise, I rose without turning on the lights. I folded the dress carefully, smoothing the fabric the way my mother once taught me, and placed it back in the closet. Some things deserved respect, even when people didn't. The keys were still hanging from my neck. They always were. I had worn them longer than I had worn my wedding ring. My father had placed them there years ago, closing my fingers around the cool metal with hands already weakened by illness. Victoria, he told me, this land outlives us. Protect it, even if it hurts. Later, when my husband was still alive, he made me promise something. My father had given me the keys, but my husband had made me promise never to hand them over. At the time, I didn't understand why he sounded afraid. The phone rang just after sunrise. I stared at the screen until it stopped buzzing. Then it rang again. His name filled the display. Ethan. I knew, somehow, that if I answered, nothing would ever be the same. I let it ring. For the first time in his life, I chose silence over sacrifice. I went into the kitchen instead and made coffee, French roast, the way Ethan liked it when he was younger. Back when he used to wake up early to help me with the horses, before life became complicated. Before everything had to be negotiated. Ethan was 12 when his father died. One day he was a boy. The next, he stood in the doorway trying to look strong, holding tools too heavy for his hands. I can fix the fence, he'd say. No, sweetheart, I'd answer. Not anymore, he'd reply. I'm the man of the house now. And he tried. We learned survival together on that land. He grew beneath those oak trees, seasons passing quietly around us. When he left for college, the house felt hollow. When he came back, it felt like breathing again. This is home, Mom, he once said. My kids will grow up here. I believed him. The phone rang again. This time I answered. Mom, his voice sounded tired. Can you come to the ranch? We need to talk. The ranch. As if I hadn't been publicly dismissed from it less than 12 hours earlier. I can't talk right now, I said, and hung up before he could reply. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold, and something settled painfully in my chest. I wasn't just hurt. I was being erased. Quietly, politely, permanently. Since Olivia entered his life, decisions were no longer discussed. They were announced. Traditions weren't honored. They were tolerated. My presence hadn't offended her because of a dress. It offended her because I still existed. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. Ethan. Mom. Olivia thinks we need the keys to make some changes. There was no please. No explanation. Changes. That word again. I stared at the message, the weight of the keys pressing against my chest, heavy with generations of promises. And for the first time, I understood why my husband had insisted they stay with me. Not because he didn't trust our son, but because he knew how easily love could be redirected. As the morning sun crept through the kitchen window, one truth became impossible to ignore. If I gave up the keys, I wouldn't just lose the ranch. I would lose the last piece of myself. I didn't know it yet, but the next conversation with my son would force me to choose between being a mother and disappearing entirely. After refusing to give up the keys, I didn't go to the ranch that morning. Instead, I spent hours doing the kinds of chores that don't actually need doing. Wiping an already clean counter, straightening papers that would soon be scattered again. When you reach my age, you learn that busy hands are often just a place for the heart to hide, because stillness can be too honest. By noon, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was Olivia. I stared at her name on the screen longer than I cared to admit. My first instinct was not to answer. In all the years I'd known her, she had never once called me directly, not to ask how I was, not to thank me for anything, not even to argue. I answered. Victoria, she said warmly, as if we were old friends. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Her voice was smooth, careful, every word placed exactly where it needed to be. I was hoping to speak to my son, I replied. Oh, she said softly. Ethan's busy right now. I thought it might be easier if we talked woman to woman. That phrase, woman to woman, settled uneasily in my chest. It felt like a line being drawn. She continued before I could respond. Yesterday was very emotional for everyone. Weddings can bring out old dynamics. Old dynamics. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. Being asked to leave wasn't emotional, I said. It was humiliating. There was a pause. Not awkward. Calculated. I'm sorry you felt that way, Olivia replied. Not sorry it happened. But we're trying to start our marriage without interference. Interference. I thought of the tablecloths, the planning, the money, the years. I'm his mother, I said quietly. Exactly, she answered. And that's why boundaries are important. The words sounded rehearsed. She spoke gently, but everything she said was a decision already made. They wouldn't be asking. They would be informing from now on. We want to make some updates to the ranch, she continued. Modernize things. Make it more suitable for our future. Our future. I waited for her to say together. She didn't. I already knew what was coming. And the keys? I asked. Another pause. We think it's best if Ethan holds onto them now, she said. It will simplify things. Simplify. As if history could be folded away like an old receipt. That land isn't just property, I said. It's family. She sighed lightly, the way someone does when speaking to a stubborn child. I understand it's sentimental to you, she said, as if love were a weakness. But Ethan and I need to build something that's ours. Ours. Not once did she say yours too. I realized then that this conversation had never been about compromise. It was about permission, and she wasn't asking for mine. I won't give you the keys, I said. Her voice cooled just slightly. I think you'll reconsider, she replied. Ethan doesn't like conflict. And she knew exactly how to use that. After we hung up, I sat down slowly, my knees aching more than usual. Age has a way of reminding you when something important has shifted. For years, I had believed love meant endurance, that if I stayed quiet long enough, everything would settle. But as I looked at the keys resting against my chest, I understood something new. Silence hadn't protected my relationship with my son. It had only taught others how far they could go. That evening, Ethan finally came to see me, and what he asked for next would change the balance of power between us forever. Ethan arrived just before sunset. I knew it was him before I opened the door. The knock was familiar, soft, hesitant, as if he were asking permission in a house that had once been his. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, one hand resting against the doorframe, reminding myself to breathe. When I opened the door, he looked smaller somehow. Older, too. Not in years, but in certainty. Mom, he said. That single word carried everything he didn't say. I stepped aside without answering. He walked in slowly, eyes moving through the room, as if he were seeing it for the first time. The photographs were still on the wall, his school portrait, his first horse, his graduation day. Proof of a life that didn't begin with Olivia. He didn't sit right away. Neither did I. I didn't mean for yesterday to go the way it did, he began, staring at the floor. Things just escalated. Escalated. As if humiliation were an accident. You asked me to leave, I said. My voice surprised me by how steady it was. In front of everyone. He winced. She was overwhelmed. I nodded slowly. So was I. He finally looked up then. For a brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to bring me wildflowers and apologize when he broke something he loved. Mom, he said, you have to understand. Olivia's trying to build a life with me. A marriage needs unity. Unity. I gestured toward the chair across from me. He sat. I remained standing. Unity doesn't require erasing people, I said. He exhaled sharply and rubbed his hands together. That's not what this is. Then tell me what it is, I replied. He hesitated, long enough that the answer formed before he spoke. She feels like you don't trust her, he said. Like you're holding on to things that should be ours now. There it was. The keys, I said. He nodded. relief and tension crossing his face at the same time. It would just make things easier, Mom. Less tension, less back and forth. I already told Olivia no. I know, he said quickly. That's why I'm here. He looked at me then, not as my son, but as someone negotiating terms. You don't need to carry all that responsibility anymore, he continued. You've done enough. Let us take over. Enough. I thought of sleepless nights, of fences repaired, of promises kept after everyone else was gone. Did Olivia ask you to say that? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. She's not trying to hurt you, he said finally. She just wants clarity. Clarity. I reached up and held the keys in my palm, feeling their familiar weight. These don't represent control, I said. They represent trust. I'm your son, he replied. You can trust me. I searched his face for certainty and didn't find it. Trust doesn't disappear overnight, I said, but it can be handed away. His jaw tightened. Why are you making this so hard? I met his eyes. Why are you? The silence between us grew heavy. I'm asking you, he said quietly. Please. For the first time, I heard something else beneath his words. Fear. Not of me, but of what would happen if he went back without the keys. I understood then that this wasn't a request between a mother and her son. It was a test, and I was being measured by how much of myself I was willing to give up to keep his peace. I didn't answer him that night, but the decision I made afterward would set something irreversible in motion. I didn't answer Ethan. Not that night. Not after his pleas lingered in the room like unfinished business. I watched him leave the way you watch someone walk into whether you know will change them. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there long after his footsteps faded, listening to the house settle. Old houses do that. They sigh and creak, as if remembering things the people inside are trying to forget. I slept in short pieces, waking often. Each time, my hand reached instinctively for the keys at my chest, making sure they were still there. They were. By morning, the decision had already been made. Not because I was brave, because I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being told that love required surrender. I made tea instead of coffee. Sat at the table where Ethan once did his homework. Outside, the fields were quiet, waiting the way they always had. Land doesn't rush you. It allows time. Around mid-morning, I drove into town. There was a small law office just off Main Street. I had passed it 100 times without noticing it. This time I parked. The lawyer was younger than my son, kind-eyed and careful with his words. I told him everything. My father, my husband, the ranch, the keys, the wedding. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he folded his hands and said something I hadn't expected. You're not taking something away, he said. You're protecting what you were entrusted with. I felt something loosen in my chest. We talked for over an hour. About deeds. About boundaries. About the difference between ownership and access. When I left, the sun was higher, the air warmer. Nothing had changed on the surface, but underneath everything had. I didn't call Ethan. That evening, the phone buzzed. Ethan, did you think about what we talked about? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Me, yes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Ethan, and I typed slowly, choosing each word as if it mattered because it did. Me. The keys stay with me. The reply came quickly. Ethan, you're choosing this over us? The question hurt more than anything else he'd said. I set the phone down and walked outside. The sky was turning gold, the way it had on the day he was born. I remembered holding him for the first time, promising myself I would never be the reason he felt alone. But I was also the reason this land still existed. The reason promises hadn't been broken yet. I picked up the phone again. Me, I'm choosing myself. There was no response. That night, I sat on the porch as darkness settled in. Crickets sang. The house stood behind me, solid and patient. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. But peace, I would soon learn, doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it knocks. The next morning, I discovered that choosing myself had consequences, and someone else had already made a move. I noticed at the moment I turned into the driveway. Something was wrong. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to make my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The house looked the same, the porch, the shutters, the trees lining the fence, but there was a feeling I couldn't name. I parked and stepped out of the car slowly. The air was cooler than the day before. The sky low and gray, pressing down. I walked toward the front door, reaching automatically for the keys around my neck. They didn't fit. I tried again. Once. Twice. The lock resisted, unfamiliar beneath my fingers. I stepped back, staring at the door as if it had betrayed me. That was when I noticed it. The lock was new. My breath caught. I ran my fingers along the metal, cold and smooth, untouched by time. The house I had lived in for decades no longer recognized me. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Harder this time, my knuckles stinging. Still nothing. I stood there longer than I should have, hoping reason would return things to the way they were. It didn't. I sat down slowly on the porch step, the keys resting uselessly in my palm. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed. "Ethan, Mom, don't panic." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. "Me. Why can't I get into my house?" The reply came almost immediately. "Ethan, Olivia thought it would be better this way. Temporary. Just until things calm down. Temporary. A word people use when they don't want to admit permanence." I didn't answer. My hands were shaking too badly. A car pulled into the driveway behind me. I turned. It was Olivia. She stepped out carefully, sunglasses in place despite the cloud cover. She moved with the calm of someone who believed she was in the right. "I was hoping you'd understand," she said, removing her glasses. "This isn't meant to hurt you." I rose slowly, every joint protesting. "You changed the locks," I said, "without telling me." "We needed space," she replied. "You were refusing to cooperate." Cooperate. As if my life were a project she was managing. "That house is mine," I said. "It's Ethan's too," she replied smoothly. "And he agrees this was necessary." Necessary. I looked past her, toward the fields stretching behind the house, toward the land my father had protected, my husband had loved, my son had promised to honor. "I never raised him to do this," I said quietly. Olivia's expression softened, not with kindness, but with certainty. "People change," she said, "especially when they grow up." I realized then that this wasn't about locks. It was about boundaries being erased and redrawn without my consent. "I'll give you some time," she added, "to think." She got back into her car and drove away. I stood alone on the porch, locked out of my own life. Eventually, I walked back to my car. I didn't cry. Shock has a way of drying tears before they can form. I drove straight to the lawyer's office. When I told him what happened, his face hardened. "They can't do that," he said. And now they've crossed the line. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something shift. Not grief. Resolve. What they didn't realize was that changing the locks had given me something I no longer feared to use. The lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He read quietly through the documents I had brought, the deed, the trust papers, my husband's handwritten notes folded so many times they felt soft. He placed them carefully on his desk, as if they carried weight beyond ink. "They made a mistake," he said finally. I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap, feeling steadier than I had in days. Shock had passed. What remained was clarity. "They assumed silence meant surrender," he continued. "And they assumed you wouldn't act. I thought of all the times I had swallowed my words to keep peace, of every moment I had stepped back so someone else could feel comfortable. Yes, I said. They did. He explained my options slowly, making sure I understood every step. Not just the legal ones, the emotional ones too. Because choices at my age are rarely just about rights. They're about consequences. We didn't rush. By the time I left his office, the sun was high and my resolve higher. That afternoon, I drove back to the ranch, not to enter, but to stand at the gate. I looked at the land stretching wide and patient before me. It had seen worse than this. It had survived storms and droughts and grief. So had I. The letter went out that evening. Not angry, not threatening, clear. It stated ownership. It stated boundaries. It stated consequences. Most importantly, it stated something I had never said out loud before. Access was no longer automatic. Ethan called that night. I let it ring. When he called again, I answered. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the strain now. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" "I tried," I replied. "You brought someone else to speak for you." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "Neither was changing the locks," I answered. Silence. Then, quieter, Olivia's upset. I closed my eyes. "I imagine she is." "You didn't have to involve lawyers," he said. I took a breath. I didn't have to be locked out of my own home either. He exhaled sharply. "You're making this into a battle." "No," I said. "I'm ending one." There it was, the truth neither of us wanted to say before. He didn't argue. Instead, he said something that surprised me. "I didn't think you'd go this far." I felt no pride in my reply, only honesty. I didn't think I'd have to. After we hung up, I sat quietly, listening to the wind move through the trees. The house stood in the distance, unchanged. Still mine, still waiting. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the wedding. But peace, I was learning, is rarely respected when it threatens someone else's control. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach tighten. "Olivia, we need to talk. Today." I didn't know what she planned to say, but I knew it wouldn't be a request this time. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Olivia chose it. Neutral ground, she called it. Somewhere public, controlled, and safe for her. She was already seated when I arrived, hands folded neatly around a cup she hadn't touched. Her posture was perfect, calm, prepared. I sat across from her without ordering anything. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded. "You said it was important." "It is," she replied. "Things have become unnecessary. Unnecessary." I waited. She glanced toward the window, then back at me. "Ethan is under a lot of pressure. From work. From you. From this situation." I didn't respond. "You've always been strong," she continued. "But strength doesn't mean refusing to let go." "Let go?" "I didn't lock myself out of my home," I said quietly. Her lips tightened for just a second. "No," she said. "You forced our hand." There it was. "I need you to understand something," Olivia said, lowering her voice. "This isn't about the house. It's about stability." "Stability for whom?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "For the family Ethan and I are building." The family, as if I were a temporary structure in the way of something permanent. "You don't trust me," she said. "That's the real problem." "I don't trust what you've done," I replied. She leaned forward slightly. "And yet you expect Ethan to choose you." I met her gaze. "I expect my son to choose what's right." She exhaled, impatient now. "That's exactly the issue. You still see him as your son first." The words settled heavily between us. "And you don't?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough. "He's my husband," she said. "That comes before everything else. Including you," she didn't say. I stirred the table with my fingertip, feeling the faint groove in the wood. "You asked for keys," I said. "You changed locks. You involved lawyers, and now you want peace. Her eyes hardened. I want cooperation. No, I replied. You want control. The word hung there. For the first time, she dropped the softness. If you keep pushing, you'll lose him, she said flatly. I felt it then, the threat finally spoken. Is that a warning? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I raised him, I said slowly. I didn't raise him to abandon people. You raised him to leave, she said. That's what children are supposed to do. I stood, my knees stiff, my heart steady. Leaving doesn't require erasing, I said. She watched me gather my things. Think carefully, she said. You don't want to be alone. I paused, one hand on the chair. I already was, I replied. I'm just done pretending otherwise. I walked out of the cafe without looking back. Outside, the air felt lighter, but I knew something had shifted. She had stopped asking. And when someone stops asking, they start planning. That evening, I realized Olivia wasn't the only one making plans, and Ethan would soon be forced to choose a side. Ethan came the next day. Not in the evening, not after work, not when it was convenient, but early, before the day could harden around either of us. I saw his truck at the gate and felt a calm settle over me that surprised us both. I met him outside. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that comes from standing between two truths and knowing one of them will cost you. Mom, he said, stopping a few steps away. Ethan, I replied. Neither of us moved closer. I spoke to Olivia, he began. I know, I said. He frowned. She said you threatened her. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. I told her the truth, I said. That control isn't cooperation. He ran a hand through his hair. She feels like you're trying to push her out. I'm trying not to be pushed out, I answered. We stood in silence, the land stretching behind us like a witness. I need to understand something, I said finally. Did you know she was going to change the locks? His hesitation was brief, but enough. You didn't stop her, I said. He swallowed. I didn't think she'd actually do it. But she did, I replied. And you let me sit on that porch wondering if I still belonged anywhere. His shoulders sagged. I didn't want to fight. So you let her fight for you, I said. That landed. He looked away. I love her. I know, I said. That's not the question. He looked back at me, confusion in his eyes. The question, I continued, is whether you believe love requires silence. He didn't answer. Because if it does, I said, you'll keep choosing the person who speaks loudest. He took a step closer now. What do you want me to do? I held his gaze. I want you to tell me the truth. He exhaled slowly. She thinks the ranch should be sold. The words felt heavier than anything else he'd said. Why? I asked. She says it ties us to the past. That we need something new. I nodded once. And what do you think? He hesitated again, longer this time. I don't know, he said honestly. I felt no anger, only sadness. You promised your children would grow up here, I reminded him. I promised a lot of things, he replied quietly. And you're allowed to change, I said. But you're not allowed to rewrite history and pretend it didn't matter. He looked at the ground. She says you're manipulating me. I almost laughed then, but I didn't. Did she tell you I went to a lawyer to hurt you? Yes. Did she tell you I went because you locked me out of my own home? He closed his eyes. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said gently. I'm asking you to choose values. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a long while. What if I choose wrong, he asked. I reached for the keys, letting them rest openly in my palm. Then you'll spend your life wondering when love turned into permission, I said. The next decision Ethan made would reveal not just who he loved, but who he was becoming. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stood there with the keys glinting in the sunlight between us, their weight suddenly visible, undeniable. I watched his face change, not dramatically, but slowly, as if something inside him were aligning for the first time in years. I never wanted this, he said finally. Neither did I replied. I just wanted things to be easy, he continued. I wanted everyone to get along. I nodded. That's not a flaw, but it becomes one when it costs you your voice. He looked past me toward the fields. Olivia says conflict means something is broken. Conflict means something matters, I said. What matters is how you handle it. He was quiet again. Then he said the words I hadn't expected. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. She changed the locks without telling me. I met his eyes. I know. She said it was necessary, he continued. That it would push things forward. And did it? I asked. He shook his head. It pushed everything apart. The wind moved through the grass, steady and patient. I didn't stop her, he said, his voice lower now. That's on me. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. I need you to hear something, he said. I don't want to sell the ranch. I felt my breath catch, just slightly. She thinks it represents control, he continued. But to me it's home. Home. I don't want to live my life cutting off pieces of where I came from, he said, even if it makes things harder. I let the word settle. I didn't reach for him. I didn't praise him. I simply listened. But I also don't want to lose my marriage, he added. That's the balance, I said. Not silence. Balance. He nodded slowly. I'm going to tell her the locks get changed back, he said, and that the keys stay with you. I searched his face for doubt. There was fear there, but also resolve. She won't like it, he admitted. No, I said. She won't. And she may leave, he said. I didn't soften the truth. That's a risk. He swallowed. If she does, I'll have to live with that. I held out the keys, not to give them to him, but to show him they were real. These aren't weapons, I said. They're trust. He nodded. I need time, he said. You've taken enough, I replied gently. Now you're choosing. He stepped back, as if the air between us had shifted. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? I asked. For not disappearing, he replied. When he left, I didn't feel victory. I felt relief. But relief, like peace, rarely arrives alone. Because when Ethan told Olivia his decision, her response would show just how fragile control really is. I didn't hear from Ethan that night. That, more than anything, told me how the conversation had gone. When morning came, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that don't promise rain, but hold it anyway. I moved slowly through the house, listening to the familiar sounds, the kettle heating, the clock ticking, reminding myself that this place still belonged to me. Around noon, the phone rang. It wasn't Ethan. It was Olivia. This time, she didn't pretend warmth. Did you think this would work? She asked, skipping any greeting. I didn't plan anything, I replied. I told the truth. You undermine my marriage, she said sharply. I sat down at the kitchen table. No, I stopped lying to protect it. There was a pause, short, strained. He came home last night and told me the locks were being changed back, she said. That the keys stay with you. I said nothing. He says you made him see things differently, she continued. That you made him question me. I asked him one question, I replied. The rest was his. Her voice hardened. You've always wanted to be the center of his life. The accusation felt rehearsed. I wanted to be his mother, I said. There's a difference. She laughed once without humor. You don't know what it's like to build a marriage. I was married for 32 years, I said quietly. I know exactly what it takes. Silence followed. Not the calm kind, the cracking kind. He chose you, she said finally. No, I corrected her. He chose honesty. That's not how marriage works, she snapped. That's exactly how it should, I replied. Her breathing was audible now. Controlled, but strained. If he keeps siding with you, she said, this won't last. I closed my eyes. Then it wasn't strong to begin with. She ended the call without another word. That afternoon, Ethan arrived unannounced. He looked shaken. "She packed a bag," he said as soon as he stepped inside. "She said she needs space." I nodded once. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect her to react like that," he admitted. "You didn't expect resistance," I said gently. He sat down heavily. "She said I embarrassed her." "Did you?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "I told her I wouldn't sell the ranch, that I wouldn't lock you out again." "That's not embarrassment," I said. "That's disagreement." He rubbed his face. "She says I'm choosing you over her." I leaned forward. "You chose not to lie. Those aren't the same thing." He was quiet. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "No one ever does," I replied. "But you're allowed to find out without destroying yourself." He looked around the room, the photographs, the quiet order, the life that had shaped him. "I forgot how steady it feels here," he said softly. "That's because steadiness doesn't demand anything," I replied. "It just holds." When he left, the house felt different, not lighter, but truer. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Control doesn't vanish quietly. It resists. What Olivia did next wouldn't be spoken aloud, but it would force a reckoning none of us could avoid. Olivia didn't call again. That worried me more than the arguments. People who rely on control don't retreat loudly. They retreat strategically. And silence, I had learned, was rarely peace. It was preparation. 2 days passed. Ethan stayed at the ranch, sleeping in his old room, moving carefully through the house as if afraid to disturb something fragile. We spoke politely, cautiously, like people relearning a shared language. On the third morning, the mail arrived. At first, it looked ordinary: bills, advertisements, a folded envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. No return address. I opened it standing at the counter. Inside were copies of documents. Not originals. Copies. Bank statements. Old agreements. Notes from years ago I barely remembered signing. Routine things. Harmless things taken out of context. My hands went cold. At the bottom of the stack was a letter. Typed. Formal. It suggested, carefully, indirectly, that I was no longer capable of managing my affairs alone. Age was mentioned. Stress. Emotional instability following recent family conflict. I sat down slowly. It wasn't a threat. It was a record being built. Ethan found me at the table a few minutes later. "What's wrong?" he asked. I slid the papers toward him without speaking. He read them once. Then again. "She's trying to question your competency," he said, disbelief sharpening his voice. "Yes," I replied, quietly. He looked up at me. "She can't do that." "She can try," I said. "And she has." He stood abruptly, anger finally breaking through his restraint. "This is crossing a line." "She crossed it when she changed the locks," I said. "This is just the next step." He paced the room. "Why would she do this?" I met his eyes. "Because control doesn't survive refusal." That afternoon, the lawyer confirmed my fear. "They're laying groundwork," he said. "Not to win today, but to wear you down over time." "Can they succeed?" Ethan asked. The lawyer looked at me before answering. "Only if she stays silent." I understood then. Silence was no longer dignity. It was danger. That evening, Ethan sat across from me, his hands clenched. "I didn't see this coming," he said. "You weren't meant to," I replied. "This wasn't about you choosing. It was about making my choice irrelevant." He swallowed. "I married someone who doesn't trust me." "No," I said gently. "You married someone who doesn't trust anyone she can't control." The house felt heavier that night, as if the walls themselves had heard the accusation. Before bed, I gathered the documents into a folder and placed them beside my keys. "I won't fight her the way she expects," I said, "but I won't disappear either." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then neither will I." For the first time since the wedding, I believed him. But belief, I was learning, doesn't stop consequences. It only prepares you for them. The next step would require me to speak publicly, and once I did, there would be no quiet way back. I spent that night awake, not from fear, but from clarity. When you reach a certain age, you stop mistaking exhaustion for peace. I had been quiet for years, believing restraint was the same as grace. Now I understood the difference. Grace chooses when to speak. Silence, when forced, is something else entirely. By morning, I knew what had to be done. Not loudly, not angrily, publicly but with care. Ethan watched me as I dressed, choosing a simple blouse and cardigan. No jewelry except the keys at my chest. He didn't ask where I was going. He already knew. The community center was hosting a small gathering that afternoon. Nothing formal. A local meeting about land preservation and family estates. I had been invited weeks ago and nearly declined. Now I went. The room was half full when I arrived. Familiar faces turned toward me. Neighbors, old friends, people who had known my family longer than they had known me. I took a seat near the front. When the moderator opened the floor for comments, I stood. My legs felt stiff, but my voice didn't waver. I've lived on the same land for over 30 years, I began. Not just as an owner, but as a caretaker. Heads nodded. I inherited responsibility before I inherited comfort, I continued. And I was taught that stewardship isn't control. It's trust passed carefully from one generation to the next. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse. I spoke of promises, of legacy, of what happens when power tries to disguise itself as concern. I spoke of age not as weakness but as witness. I've recently been told that protecting what I was entrusted with might mean I'm no longer capable, I said calmly. I disagree. The room was silent. Being older doesn't mean being absent, I continued. And stepping aside should always be a choice, not a decision made for you. When I sat down, my hands were steady. People approached me afterward. Quiet words, warm hands, stories shared in low voices. You did the right thing, one woman said, squeezing my arm. They tried that with my mother. Ethan stood nearby, watching, not intervening, not hiding. On the drive home, he said only one thing. I didn't realize how many people would listen to you. I smiled faintly. They always have. I just forgot. That evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages, calls, none from Olivia. She didn't need to say anything. By speaking, I had removed the shadow she was counting on. At home, I placed the folder of documents beside the keys again. Paper and metal, evidence and legacy. For the first time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not anger, authority. And I knew she felt it too. The next move wouldn't come from Olivia. It would come from someone who had been watching quietly all along. The call came just after dinner. I recognized the number before I answered, and my heart tightened in a way that surprised me. Some names, no matter how much time passes, still carry history in their silence. Victoria, the voice said gently. It's Margaret. Margaret had been my husband's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not out of anger, but out of distance. Life has a way of scattering families quietly, without warning or ceremony. I heard you spoke at the community meeting, she continued. Someone sent me a recording. I said nothing, waiting. I'm glad you did, she said. I've been meaning to call for a long time. We spoke for nearly an hour. She remembered my husband clearly. His insistence that the land remain intact. His fear, not of change, but of erasure. He trusted you, she said, more than anyone. Before we hung up, she said something that made my breath catch. There's something you should know, she added. He updated his estate plans shortly before he passed. I was there. I sat down slowly. He anticipated conflict, Margaret said. Not with Ethan, but with anyone who tried to push you aside. She explained that my husband had added a clause. A quiet one. A safeguard that couldn't be triggered by emotion or pressure, only by action. Changing the locks without your consent, she said. That counts. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the ranch. Age had softened her but not weakened her. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, eyes sharp and observant. Together, we reviewed the documents she had brought. They were clear, uncomfortable, powerful. If any party attempted to restrict my access or undermine my authority through coercion or misrepresentation, control of the estate would be legally frozen, pending review by an independent trustee. Ethan read the papers in silence. She didn't know about this, he said finally. No, Margaret replied. She wasn't meant to. He looked at me, something close to shame in his eyes. Dad planned for this. He planned for you too, I said. Just not at my expense. Margaret stayed for tea. She spoke little, but when she did, it mattered. I watched you give everything to that family, she told Ethan. Don't confuse patience with permission. That afternoon, Ethan left to speak with Olivia. Alone. When he returned, his face told me enough. She's furious, he said. She says this proves you were planning against her all along. Margaret stood, steady despite her years. Truth often feels like betrayal to people who rely on control. As she prepared to leave, she took my hands in hers. You're not alone anymore, she said. That night, I slept deeply. But I knew better than to believe this was over. Because control, when cornered, rarely retreats. It strikes. What Olivia did next would force everything into the open, and no one would be able to pretend anymore. Olivia didn't wait long. 2 days after Margaret's visit, she showed up at the ranch without warning. No call, no message, just her car pulling into the drive as the afternoon light faded. I was on the porch when she stepped out, dressed carefully, posture perfect, as if appearance alone could still manage the situation. Ethan arrived minutes later. That wasn't coincidence. I want this settled, Olivia said before anyone could sit down. Today. Margaret stood beside me, her presence calm but unmistakable. Then speak plainly, she said. Olivia's eyes flicked toward her. This is a family matter. It is, Margaret replied. That's why I'm here. We moved into the living room. The air felt tight, like a storm waiting for permission. Olivia spoke first. You've painted me as controlling, she said, looking directly at me. As if I'm some kind of villain. I folded my hands. I've told the truth. You went public, she said sharply. You involved lawyers. You turned people against me. I protected myself, I answered. After you changed the locks. That was temporary, she snapped. Margaret leaned forward. Temporary actions still have consequences. Olivia's composure cracked just enough to show frustration. You don't understand what it's like to marry into a family where the past holds more power than the future. I met her gaze. The past doesn't hold power. It holds context. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about keys anymore, Olivia continued. It's about who comes first. Silence followed. She turned to Ethan. I need to know you're with me. He didn't answer immediately. I watched him carefully, not as his mother, but as someone witnessing a choice unfold. I'm with you, he said slowly, but not at the cost of my integrity. Her face hardened. So you're choosing her. I'm choosing not to lie, he replied. That's the same thing, she shot back. No, Margaret said quietly. It isn't. Olivia stood abruptly. If I stay in this marriage, I'll always come second. Ethan looked at her, pain clear in his eyes. No, you'll come alongside, but you won't come above everyone else. The room felt suddenly very still. I won't live like that, Olivia said. Ethan swallowed. Then we may want different things. The words fell heavy, undeniable. Olivia picked up her bag. This isn't over. No, I said gently. It is. She laughed once, bitterly. You think you won. I shook my head. There's nothing to win when everyone loses something. She left without another word. The door closed softly behind her. Ethan sank into a chair, hands shaking. I didn't think it would come to this. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. Truth always feels abrupt when you've been avoiding it. That evening, after Margaret left, Ethan and I sat together in silence. I don't know what happens next, he said. You don't have to, I replied. Just don't disappear from yourself. He nodded slowly. Outside, the land rested as it always had, unchanged by conflict, patient with human struggle. And for the first time since the wedding, I knew this wasn't just about holding ground. It was about rebuilding, honestly. What followed her departure wasn't peace, but a reckoning that would test whether healing was still possible. The house felt different after Olivia left. Not quieter, emptier, as if something sharp had been removed, leaving space that hadn't yet decided what it would become. Ethan stayed that night. He slept in his old room, the one with the uneven window and the faint smell of cedar that never quite left. I heard him moving once or twice, restless, the way he used to be as a boy after a bad dream. In the morning, we didn't talk about what had happened. We talked about small things instead. Weather, repairs that needed doing, the old fence line that leaned too far east. Familiar ground, safe ground, but underneath every ordinary word was something fragile and new. Guilt, not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind that sits heavy in your chest and follows you from room to room. Mid-morning, Ethan joined me on the porch. I keep replaying it, he said, trying to figure out when it went wrong. I looked out at the fields. It didn't go wrong all at once. He nodded slowly. I didn't protect you. The admission surprised him as much as it surprised me. I don't need protection, I said. I needed respect. He swallowed. I confused peace with avoidance. That's common, I replied, especially when you love someone who demands certainty. He was quiet for a long moment. She said I was choosing my past over my future, he said. And what do you think? I asked. He leaned back, staring at the sky. I think I was trying to build a future without understanding what I was standing on. That answer told me more than any apology could. Later that day, he helped me replace the locks. We did it together, slowly, deliberately, not as a statement, as a repair. When the door opened smoothly under my key, I felt something loosen that I hadn't realized was still tight. That evening, a message came through. Not from Olivia, from a mutual friend. She's telling people you pushed her out, that you manipulated Ethan. I read it once, then set the phone down. She will, I said aloud. Ethan looked up. I'll correct it. I met his eyes. No, let truth travel at its own pace. He frowned. People will believe her. Some will, I agreed. But people who matter already know who you are. And who I am, I added silently. That night, I walked the perimeter of the land alone, keys warm against my chest. The moon hung low, familiar and unchanged. I thought of how many times I had tried to preserve peace by becoming smaller. I wouldn't do that again. When I returned to the house, Ethan was waiting. I don't know if she'll come back, he said quietly. You don't need to decide that tonight, I replied. You only need to decide who you are without her. He nodded, eyes thoughtful. For the first time, I felt we were standing on the same side of the truth. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was real. The next test wouldn't come from Olivia, but from the question everyone eventually faces after loss: what now? Time moved differently after Olivia left. Not slower, more deliberately, as if each day asked to be considered before it passed. Ethan stayed on the ranch longer than he planned. At first, it was practical, things to fix, calls to make, paperwork to untangle. But gradually, the reasons shifted. He was remembering. One afternoon, I found him in the barn, running his hand along the old stall doors. I forgot how much this place smells like work, he said. I smiled. That's because it was earned. He nodded, thoughtful. I used to think success meant leaving. And now? I asked. Now I think it means knowing what's worth coming back to. That evening, we ate together at the kitchen table. No tension, no avoidance, just presence. After dinner, he surprised me. I've been offered a transfer, he said. Out of state. I waited. I turned it down. My eyebrows lifted slightly. That's a big decision. So was staying silent, he replied. I don't want to build a life by walking away from hard things. I let that sit. He continued, I don't know what my marriage will look like now, or if there still is one. You don't have to decide that tonight, I said. I know, he replied, but I do know this. I don't want my children growing up thinking love means control. The word children made me pause. You're thinking far ahead, I said. I am, he answered, because I've seen what happens when you don't. That night, I went through old boxes in the attic. Letters, photographs, small pieces of a life lived steadily. I found one of my husband's notebooks. Inside, a line he'd written years ago caught my eye. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you refuse to abandon. I closed the notebook gently. The next morning, Ethan asked a question that surprised me. What would you want, he said, if this place wasn't just mine someday, but shared? I looked at him. Shared with whom? With the people who care for it, he replied, who respect it. I thought of neighbors, of young families priced out of land, of preservation groups I'd heard speak at the meeting. I'd want it protected, I said, not frozen, alive. He smiled. That's what I was hoping you'd say. We talked for hours about trust, stewardship, community involvement, about building something that didn't depend on one person's control. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a conversation. That afternoon, as we walked the fields together, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't clinging anymore. I was choosing, and that made all the difference. The plan we began that day would soon be tested by money, by memory, and by one final unexpected request. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was thick, cream-colored, addressed by hand. Formal without being personal, exactly the kind of envelope that signals consequence. I opened it at the kitchen table while Ethan was outside repairing the fence. Inside was an offer. A development company had been watching the area for years. The ranch, they wrote, was ideally positioned for expansion. Housing, retail, convenience. The number at the bottom made my breath catch. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding at once. Enough to erase worries. Enough to make walking away feel practical, even responsible. Ethan came in and found me staring at the page. They want to buy, I said. He read the letter silently, jaw tightening. That's a lot. Yes, I replied. It is. We sat without speaking for a long time. I won't pressure you, he said finally. This is your decision. I appreciated that more than he knew. That evening, I walked the land alone. The sun was low, turning the fields amber. I thought of my father's hands, rough from work, of my husband's careful plans, of the years I had spent protecting something that couldn't protect itself. But I also thought of age, of time, of how much easier things could be. At my age, people expect you to simplify, to trade responsibility for comfort, to step aside. The offer made sense on paper, but paper doesn't remember footsteps. That night, Margaret called. Be careful, she said gently, before I told her anything. Money has a way of rushing decisions that deserve patience. They could do good things with it, I said. Build homes. And erase history, she replied. You have to decide which matters more to you. The next day, the developer called. Polite, smooth, efficient. We're offering you freedom, he said. No more stress. No more conflict. Freedom. I looked at the keys resting on the table. No, I said calmly. You're offering me relief. There was a pause. I'll need time, I continued, and I won't be rushed. He agreed, but not convincingly. After the call, Ethan spoke quietly. If you sold, I'd understand. I turned to him. Would you? He considered it. I'd understand the logic, but I'd miss the meaning. That answer told me everything. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the other documents. The offer hadn't changed my mind, but it had tested it. And tests, I was learning, don't come once. They return. Before I could respond to the offer, another request arrived, this one from someone I hadn't expected to hear from again. I was in the garden when the call came. The soil was damp from the night before, and my hands were already dirty, grounded, steady. I almost didn't answer. Something in me recognized the number before my mind did. It was Olivia. I wiped my hands on my jeans and listened to the phone ring twice more before picking up. Victoria, she said. Her voice was different. Not softer, but stripped of its polish. I didn't think you'd call, I replied. I didn't think you'd answer, she said. We both paused. The space between us felt fuller than words. I won't take much of your time, she continued. I know I don't deserve it. That caught my attention. What do you want? I asked, not unkindly, just plainly. She exhaled. Ethan told me about the developer, about the land. I said nothing. I need to ask you something, she went on. And you don't have to say yes. I waited. I grew up moving, she said. Every few years. Nothing ever stayed. When I married Ethan, I thought if I could secure something permanent, I'd finally feel safe. There it was. Not an excuse, but an explanation. I was wrong about how to do that, she added quietly. I closed my eyes. What are you asking? I said. I want to meet, she replied. Not to argue. Not to negotiate. Just to talk. I hesitated. Everything in me wanted to protect the peace I'd earned. But peace isn't the same as avoidance. We met the next afternoon, outside, on the edge of the property. Neutral, open, honest. She looked tired, smaller than I remembered. I won't apologize for wanting security, she said, but I will apologize for how I went about it. I nodded. Control feels like safety until it costs you everything. She swallowed. Ethan hasn't decided what he wants yet. He will, I said, but not because we push him. She looked toward the fields. If you sell, I won't fight it. That surprised me. And if I don't, I asked. She met my eyes. Then I need to learn how to live without trying to own things that don't belong to me. We stood there quietly. I won't ask for the keys, she said. I won't ask for the house. What are you asking for then? I asked. She hesitated. A chance not to be your enemy. I thought of everything she had done, and everything she hadn't understood. I can offer civility, I said. Trust takes longer. She nodded, accepting the boundary. When she left, I felt no triumph, just relief. That evening, Ethan asked me one question. Do you think people can change? He said. I looked at the land, steady and patient. Yes, I replied, but only when they stopped trying to control the outcome. He nodded slowly. I realized then that the future wasn't asking me to choose between past and progress. It was asking me to hold both without fear. The final decision about the land would come soon, and when it did, it would redefine what legacy truly meant. The meeting took place in the old county office. Fluorescent lights, metal chairs, paperwork stacked too high. Nothing about the room felt worthy of the decision being made inside it. But important choices rarely happen in beautiful places. The developer sat across from me, confident but cautious now. Ethan was beside me. Margaret sat just behind, steady as ever. I've considered your offer, I said. He smiled. And I'm declining, I continued, but not without a counterproposal. That surprised him. I'm placing the land into a conservation trust, I said. It will remain protected, working land. No commercial development. The smile faded. There are tax benefits, I added calmly, and limited use agreements available for community access. You're welcome to participate in that capacity. He cleared his throat. That's not what we hoped for. I know, I replied, but it's what the land deserves. The meeting ended quickly after that. When we stepped outside, the air felt lighter. Ethan let out a long breath. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, I said. That evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The keys rested between us on the table. I want you to have these, I said. He looked startled. Mom. Not ownership, I interrupted. Stewardship. I slid a single key toward him. One. For emergencies. For responsibility. Not control. He took it carefully, like something fragile. I won't misuse it, he said. I know, I replied, because now you understand what it represents. Later that night, I wrote letters. To the trust. To the neighbors. To Ethan's future children, should he ever have them. I wrote about care. About patience. About the danger of mistaking possession for love. Before bed, I walked the land one last time that day. The wind moved through the grass like a quiet approval. I thought of my husband, of my father, of all the women who had held things together without being seen. I hadn't been erased. I had been tested, and I had chosen. The next morning, Ethan left, not to escape, but to build. He hugged me longer than usual. Thank you, he said, for trusting me. Thank you, I replied, for learning. When his car disappeared down the drive, I didn't feel alone. I felt complete. Some things aren't meant to be owned forever. They're meant to be protected until the next right hands arrive. And when that day comes, I'll be ready. But legacy doesn't end with a decision. It lives on in the quiet moments that follow.